Just a couple of quick sort of Revo plugs, if you'll indulge me. One is Lambert Smith Hampton and Revo recently collaborated on a report entitled From Recessions to Renaissance, really looking at what's next for our towns, high streets and shopping centres, and reflecting the views of key stakeholders and decision makers in the public and private sectors, and it really is worth having a read or a skim through if you get a chance. The second one is, you'll have seen these flyers on your seats for the Revo Awards. So we've refreshed what you would have previously known as the BCSE Golds and then the Revo Golds. We've got a fantastic list of categories, almost 20 categories. We've got a stunning venue, so this year's Revo Awards will be in one of the control rooms at Battersea Power Station. We wanted to find somewhere which really sort of reflected us as an industry and showcased real sort of innovation that we all want to see and want to shout about. If you haven't entered already, you've only got about 3 days to enter, but tickets will be out for the awards dinner. You can purchase those now. It is going to be quite tight for space, so I would recommend that if you are interested in going, that you get on with it and book your tickets. So to the third panel session, and when Ibrahim and I put the sort of schedule together for this afternoon, we really wanted to talk around placemaking, and you've heard some great views from Ibrahim and his panel in terms of what constitutes great sort of human-centric placemaking, and then we really wanted to hear from the future generation in terms of what they want to see from their towns and cities. And then the panel that we've got here today hopefully is going to help discuss and find some of those solutions to how we pay for it. And I know it's more complex than that. It's how we value some of the softer elements that we know are all critical to creating sort of uniqueness in our towns and cities. So without further ado, I'm just going to ask each of our panellists to give us a quick introduction to them and their roles within their businesses, and then we'll get on to talking really about partnership, collaboration, viability, what and how we go about approaching the regeneration of our towns and cities over the next sort of 15 to 20 years. So if I can start with Sophie next to me.
I knew I shouldn't have said it. Can you hear me all right? Yes. Hello, I'm Sophie White. I work for Aviva Capital Partners. I joined ACP about 12 months ago, and it's a new entity. It's been set up about 24 months, effectively using shareholder capital, Aviva shareholder capital, to invest into real estate and other opportunities in an earlier pace. So because we're using our own money, we can take a bit more risk, and ideally trying to get involved in relationships and put product out towards Aviva investors and our sort of wider Aviva investment business. Prior to ACP, I was at Homes England for 9 years, and prior to that, Deloitte. So a real sort of private partner, a public-private partnership. But I think the Aviva's sort of drive into real estate, into transformation, my role there is around regeneration. It's really interesting, and we're very excited about the opportunities that we're seeing coming forward.
Thanks, Sophie. Nuala.
Hi everyone, I'm Nuala Gallagher. I'm the Corporate Director for City Development with Liverpool City Council, so relatively new into the role in 5 months. And I'm assuming people are familiar with, I suppose, the journey that Liverpool's been on, so there's a relatively new team and a bit of stock taken in the city from a public sector perspective. So my background, I'm an architect and urban designer, and I've previously worked in Bristol and London and New York and Belfast and other places in Ireland. So I suppose the focus of the role, there was a lot of talk about branding in the earlier presentations, is what is brand Liverpool, what do people know about it, and how do we actually, I suppose, sell the city for more than, I suppose, what it's currently known as from a business investment side. The other side, and Ibrahim touched on it, about vision, and actually what is the vision that local authorities have. So we are doing a bit of a stock take on actually where does the city need to go from an investment perspective, from a master planning perspective as well, and also then about delivery and partnerships and how we work well with others and actually get delivery going in the city. So that's, I suppose, the focus of the role.
Thanks, Nuala. And to the next person who's probably got the best title in the industry that I've come across, Suzy.
Yeah, hi everybody, I'm Suzy Jones, and I have quite an epic job title. I am Urban Splash's Director of the Future, so no pressure. And what that role encompasses really is I'm responsible for strategy, so corporate strategy and any strategy that falls underneath that, including ESG, which I imagine we'll talk about at some point, innovation and brand, but also the relationship between those three things. And for those of you who are not aware of Urban Splash is a regeneration and property company. We're based in Manchester, but we have sites all over the UK.
Great, thanks, Suzy. And Jennifer?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Murray. I sit within the investments team at Homes England. I think the thing that's worth knowing now about Homes England is that despite the clue being partly in the name, we relaunched our strategic plan in May this year, and we are the government's housing and regeneration agency, and that's a really important shift of emphasis. In many ways, it's taking us back to our roots and back to our DNA, because, as Sophie knows better than I do, if you don't have to scratch the surface in Homes England very hard to find parts of English partnerships and all sorts of regeneration activities that the government's overtaken over the years. But this has been a real statement on our part to say that we are a housing delivery agency. We are very motivated by creating homes in the right places and increasing housing supply, but we really, really recognise that housing on its own doesn't fix anything, but also it's a really important part of creating those vibrant, mixed use and diverse places that people want to be and want to live in. For my own part, my day job is sort of deploying an equity allocation that we have to bring together partnerships with sort of public and private partners to deliver those new places and also those new homes. And deep in my background is a few shopping centres in my past, so it's like coming home.
Thank you. So I think hopefully you agree, we've got a great panel to sort of tackle this subject. I want to start off with, and this one's probably for Sophie and Suzy initially. I mean, what do you look for in a town or city that makes it an attractive development proposition?
So if I can go first, I think what we're really interested in actually is the raw materials. So, and it's something that's actually been quite new to me in joining the team at ACP, just partly through their previous experience, but it's understanding what the local economies are. What does your, actually, and I was at another session this morning talking about life sciences, and actually what's your local education provision like? What's your, how do people stay in your area? What are they currently doing? Are there assets that you have within the sort of fabric of the location that mean you can build on those and grow on those? So it's absolutely about recognising the kind of latent opportunity for regen. And I think it's also fair to say that market pressures for us are really important. The Aviva, obviously, UK's #1 insurer. And it's interesting for me because that institutional capital is as close, I think, to government money in a way in terms of its long-term patient view. But ultimately, it does need to be viable. It does need to be sort of proven markets. And so we're probably looking at what are the bigger places that are established but have opportunities to really help them grow and sort of bear more fruit from the raw materials that they've got.
And I think that's really interesting. It leads on really interesting, Suzy, because obviously as a developer, sometimes you're looking at those potential opportunities before they're proven. And I think Urban Splash, in terms of what they did in the early years of Manchester, is a great example of that. But what are the key drivers for you? What are you looking at Urban Splash as that attracts you to a town or city or an opportunity?
Well, I think over the last 30 years, you talked a little bit about our early years in Manchester. And I think over the last 30 years, Urban Splash has become something of a specialist in overcoming tricky property problems through regeneration and transformation. And often we are actively looking for those difficult problems to overcome, whether that is market failure, social failure, a combination of the both. Increasingly more now, risks of climate stranding, and the types of assets that those sorts of problems or challenges really create in towns and cities. But then there also needs to be, similar to what Sophie was saying, really good bones there for us to work with. And I think a lot of it comes from gut instinct to Urban Splash. You kind of have this really gut instinct of knowing what is going to work really well, and how you can use, visioning great partners who can share that vision with you to change perceptions of place.
Yeah, great. And then we'll come on to talk a little bit more about sort of partnership and collaboration, but from a public sector perspective, then sort of turning it on its head slightly, Jennifer and Nuala, what are you looking for in terms of your developer partners, your investor partners?
Oh, shall I go first? I suppose we're looking really for people that are going to share our values within what we want to do, that are going to love the city as much as we love it, and understand the city. Having deep pockets and a long-term view also helps on it, but it's really about, having an honest conversation about what we want to deliver and the quality of it, so that, you can bring the innovation. I suppose the approach we want to take in future is that we bring people in early, come in at the ground floor. What have you got to bring? The local authority doesn't have all the knowledge, so it's actually working with some partner that are going to bring that innovation and that proper partnership.
Yeah, I think in the, certainly from an investment perspective in our organisation, once you sort of got beyond the sort of basic hygiene factors, an awful lot of what Sophie's talking about, what anyone would look for in terms of track record and experience, it is about, as Nuala said, it's about alignment, it's about listening to local voice, and it's also about, I think, I feel really quite strongly about governance, and I think it's about a commitment to actually getting the governance and the process right at the start, so that we all go into things with really, really good intentions, but you've always got to be ready for what happens if it doesn't quite work out. So it's a very negative thing to say. I don't really mean it that way, but I think it is a commitment to understanding the importance of all of those points. So yeah, local voice, listening, governance.
Yeah, great. And I think we probably all agree that for transformation to truly succeed, collaboration is absolute key, and at its most basic level, collaboration is only achievable when the parties actually want to cooperate and collaborate. Could you each give us an example where either historically or now you're seeing that come forward, that collaboration and that pulling together of more than two parties is resulting in delivery success in a project? And I'll start with you again, Sophie.
Yeah, and I do think actually, and going back to the previous question about what attracts us to a place, the often local government or public sector, because these tricky things are often hard, they need public-private partnerships to take forward. So having a local authority, for instance, that is empowered and enabled and got that appetite to work with. And my example, and it's actually to do with my previous role at Homes England. So I had a period of time where I was involved in English Cities Fund. And some of you might be aware of the scheme that English Cities Fund have at Salford. And actually there, I think it has been a really, really successful partnership of Homes England in their role of an investment business, which I won't mention, of course, and also Salford City Council. It's LNG for those of you that don't know. But actually, those three partners, and Muse developers. So the three sort of private sector developer partners are working together, but also the City Council has really embedded itself. They share value opportunities. They have a really long-term view about infrastructure funding. No one's crystallising value too early, and what that enables schemes to do is to kind of wax and wane. And we know for one sure that for long-term schemes, they're going to be cyclical, because that's what the market does. So actually it enables people and the scheme to be much more flexible and sort of roll with the changes, as opposed to one entity saying, well, this is my part and I'm the landowner, so I have to take everything out now and sit back and let that work. So I think for me, that's a really good example of where that sort of public-private partnership has worked very successfully.
Great. Who wants to?
Okay, I suppose I'll talk about the Knowledge Quarter and the Innovation Zone in Liverpool and Paddington Village. And I suppose that's originally with the council and three universities, so Liverpool John Moore, Liverpool University and the School of Tropical Medicine, and setting up, I suppose, the Knowledge Quarter and Scientech Board. And the council a number of years ago went and invested and took a risk on investing in office accommodation, the Spine building, and a hotel in an area that wouldn't be, I suppose, key city centre location. I suppose since then we've got the partnership with Scientech and Bruntwood LNG, but in addition to that, the combined authority have put money in. Homes England have got a stake as well with some of the resi development on it. And I suppose just recently, the government have announced it as the, I suppose, primary innovation zone for health and life sciences, which Liverpool has a massive growing economy on. So there's a number of factors as well on that from a partnership approach. So some is about the investment development, but from a placemaking perspective, transport links in public realm are key to making this area successful. So there's been a big push on that, working locally with the combined authority to pool resources on it. But I think a range of those factors, and in particular with the university weighing in on this, has meant that it was ready for investment and the government's announcement in terms of the health and life sciences.
So my example's going to have to be Park Hill, I think. So Park Hill is a project that we have had for almost 20 years now, and we're at just about to start phase 4 of the total 5 phases. So it's a really, really long project. It's I think the largest listed building in Europe. It's began as a very, very tricky building, loved and hated in Sheffield. And the multiple partnerships that we've had to create and sustain with all stakeholders, from the city to all of the communities in and around Park Hill, the multiple architects that we work with, plus additional members of the design teams, just sustaining those partnerships over that length of time, maintaining the vision, maintaining the enthusiasm, and as Nuala said, and Sophie, I think you both touched on this, that and Jennifer, actually, in your previous comment about building partnerships with people so that you can kind of flex as you need to. You've got the right types of partners in there, all with their expertise, but all sharing the same vision and the same enthusiasm to actually deliver that. It means that you build a complete, like a resilience in the project, where one of you might kind of need buoying up at some point, and that comes from the other people within the project. And I've definitely seen that. Not that I've been involved for the whole 20 years of that project. There are people in our company who have, but I've definitely seen that transformed into the success of that particular project.
And before we come to Jennifer, I'd written down earlier about the need for flexibility and adaptability, and I'd written political will and stability, but I think that stability works both ways in the private sector and the public sector, isn't it? This is what we're talking about here is long-term relationships. It's like any long-term relationship, isn't it? You've got to work at it, and you're going to have highs and lows through that journey. But as you say, if you've got a shared vision and a shared commitment, then you're halfway there.
I think that goes further as well to how sort of emotionally engaged people are. And I think the more emotionally engaged individuals are, the more you feel you have to lose. You will work at it. Now, obviously, we're talking about really long-term projects, and you understand that people people change and move on, and teams reshape. But I think that if corporately you've got a big emotional commitment to something, then that really helps in the tougher times. I'm in danger of turning this into an English Cities Fund, Muse, LNG infomercial. But just picking up further on what Sophie said about the success of English Cities Fund, the great thing about it is you have a top-level partnership, which is actually fairly agnostic about where it goes as long as the criteria are right. And then it has the capacity to work with the local places that are ready to go, have investable proposition, and importantly want that support. So more recently, I think in terms of what you can see on the ground, Salford's a brilliant example, but the most recent place that English Cities has committed to is Bradford. And that's a big town centre project. It's got an awful lot of retail input in it. And I think it's going to be really exciting how that group of people, that group of expertise and knowledge can help transform that city centre. But just moving on from the infomercial, something that I've been really excited about that Homes England's done recently is in Digbeth, just south of the Bull Ring in Birmingham. Now, that's a quarter that is weirdly sort of very close but disconnected from the town centre. There's massive aspiration for it to become a creative film delivery kind of hub. Admittedly, the HS2 news is maybe not such good news for Digfeth right now, but in terms of our intervention, what we were able to do there was, I think back in about 2016, the council approached us and said, would we buy a parcel of land? And it was a parcel of land that was kind of critical to unlocking some of those things. So it meant that when the council was ready to bring forward its aspirations, and when the various stars were aligning with funders and with all the other groups, there was an element of sort of quiet control and power that we could bring to bear to make it all happen and bring it together. So that's that timescale thing, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, great. I was going to come on to talk a little bit about, I mean, we've talked about it today in terms of placemaking, but some of the spaces that we've talked about, the importance of spaces between buildings, creating, whether it's new public parks or others, that all contribute to the health and well-being of a city, but in isolation are difficult to afford and be part of that. How do we, and I think this also leads on to, when we're looking at what we're trying to do in transforming our towns and cities over a longer period, how do we get that balance of uses? How do we get the right types of accommodation? It's that balance between what is the sort of almost the governance from the public sector in terms of leading the way, but we often talk very simply when we talk about residential accommodation, we talk about affordable and private rented, but actually affordable, it's a bit of a misnomer in terms of the title. It's not the right title. We should be looking at different forms of affordable accommodation for a town or city, and that's exactly the same with offices, and it's the same with retail and leisure. We heard earlier about sort of how we create incubator spaces. My argument to that has always been, we've had them for 800 years. They're called markets. There's some great examples around the country now where we say reinvented markets. But how do we work together? And obviously, from a public sector perspective, finances are under more pressure now. So how do we make sure we don't compromise and we do really truly look forward to the long term? I will start with you, Jennifer, this time.
So I don't think that public spaces are necessarily the public sector's role. I think there are plenty of really good examples of the private sector delivering some really good public space. And I think in terms of that value point, Stuart, I get a little bit evangelical at this point, because I actually think, and valuers in the room can beat me up later, but I actually think that the evolution in thinking of the valuation community is helping us here, in terms of if we're saying, what is it that actually creates somewhere that is sustainable and attractive and vibrant, that is the thing that will hold value for the longer term. So whilst, it may not be day one the most economic thing, and it may be something that it's tempting to value engineer out, if you're actually looking to a long-term holding strategy, it's really, really important. And I think that, I talked about governance earlier as being slightly the teeth. I think the word I prefer to talk about is slightly different to stewardship. And it's, again, thinking when we create these partnerships and these delivery vehicles, how do we actually create the right stewardship environment that keeps Sophie's money in for the long term, keeps Splash's expertise in terms of vibrancy, that makes sure that the local government, central government are all on side. So creating those stewardship plans that means that we don't end up where we are today, where you've got very, very fractional town centre ownership and a limited cohesive view on how things are put together, especially those in-between spaces.
I like that, because we talk to flippantly sometimes about vision and master plans, and everybody's sort of got a bit sort of lost belief, I think, in that journey you go through. And I think if you've got that vision and then you're doing something here which is part of the building blocks, as long as you see that vision, then people can buy into that. And when I say people, I'm talking about the local community. Yeah. And part of also the rationale is often it might need the bigger funds or the bigger developers to come in, but what you want it to be at the end of the day is you want it actually to be local, regional developers coming in and others coming in. But Suzy, from that perspective, it's something that Urban Splash have been fantastic at, and you talked about Park Hill, and that's a great example of it. And I was hearing about the pub that's open, which is the culmination of about 20 years at Park Hill, and that's a fantastic story. But you wouldn't have probably been able to do that 10 years ago, would you? It's now is the appropriate time to do it.
Yeah, exactly, and it's those sorts of things that you talked about, those spaces in between buildings, those public spaces that we definitely recognise generate the additional value that we need when we're taking on what we call tricky property problems. And I think in Regen there's this sort of sliding scale. I don't know if anybody here has read that brilliant report on the King's Cross Regen. I'm sure probably all of us have read that. And then this sort of sliding scale of private and public investment in Regen projects, and how that changes depending on the complexity of the project. And I think that does ring true to me, where there is a need for increased public investment at certain points in projects, at certain types of projects, and less so on others. Places like Park Hill, for example, there does need to be some gap funding. Where that gap funding goes can go into those spaces, which provide that longer term value, but also the shorter term impact. So it's those sorts of things that really trigger that impact of regeneration. And then from our perspective, in terms of where we invest our money really early on in any of our regen projects, aside from all of the design and actually building of the stuff, is in seeding the activity that we need to last for a really, really long time, whether that's with, Imi and the barge in Portloop, and the paddleboarding lessons, and the open air cinema things that the community itself will start to deliver. We'll seed that really, really early. And that doesn't necessarily need huge amounts of public investment. That just needs the will to find the local relationships and nurture the local relationships with those, can we call them like local stars? The people who are there and will be there for the next 30 years, living and breathing that location long after we've left. And that I think is really, really important.
And Nuala, you're sort of relatively at the start of your journey at Liverpool City Council, and coming into a big major city council like that has got so much going on. How do you approach it from looking at what you can do and still begin? Because I always feel with Liverpool, it's still going through transformation, and there's so much more opportunity within the city.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I just see it as a massive amount of opportunity in terms of some of the potential insights. I think, for me, Liverpool hasn't explored its full potential yet, and that's where I suppose we're going and want to work with partners. But going back to this whole thing about placemaking, and to pick up your point about spaces and the bits between buildings, like placemaking, the doing word is a verb. It's continually something that needs to happen. So. And we always have this discussion internally within council. You want to put in a load of more green spaces, and to do that, and then you need the budget to maintain it, and then you have a fight because adults and children have 80% of the council's budget, and how do you start to do it? And so that's where the stewardship piece, and actually setting out at the outside what a proper plan is, who owns what, how are we going to deliver it, and how are we going to maintain it, so that we can keep doing that in terms of values. But I also think that meanwhile use and sort of the short, medium and long term about spaces, what they can be, can do a huge amount in terms of adding value to places that are maybe previously unloved. And so our culture team have done, say, quite a bit of that in Liverpool, and that's something we want to increase, in terms of what we do. But it's trying to get all the stakeholders together. I think bids play a massively important role. For example, in the city centre, Liverpool 1 and Grosvenor have done an amazing job in keeping the place. It's trying to match that where we own land as well, and get that comprehensive approach and a delivery plan. But it's, the money isn't always there within the council's budget to maintain it, which is where we need that wider conversation.
And Sophie, from an investor perspective, you talked earlier about looking at proven opportunities. what can some of these places do to almost prove it earlier, or how important is that sort of vision or that confidence that you've got in the stewardship would encourage you to come in and invest earlier on in the process?
Yeah, and I think, and to be really clear, so ACP is absolutely there to come in and invest earlier because it's different capital. It has different sort of rules and requirements around it. And maybe that bit earlier was about the sort of the raw materials that you can build on. So, for example, we've invested in Digbeth because there's a huge opportunity that's coming forward and you can see it happening. And I think it is about, it's back to that partnership bit and that alignment that we talked about earlier. But also, so I also think that the kind of the placemaking and the open space, and we're doing a lot of thinking at the moment about schemes that we've got coming forwards. And I was at Opportunity London this morning and talking about affordable housing and space, and a place that looks lovely and you can go and buy a £4.50 cup of coffee isn't probably that inclusive, is it? So when we start thinking about truly diverse communities, different affordable large and small A models, how do we make place that actually attracts everyone? How do we invite people in to come and use it? That might just be to come and sit and enjoy it, or that might be to come and buy something or to do. And I also think that meanwhile use is really important. And it's something like, I don't know, another Muse scheme. Wapping Wharf did an incredible job around sort of using meanwhile use for food and beverage and bringing people into a place that probably wasn't very active. And actually that makes people feel safe too, doesn't it? So the more people around, the safer you feel, the more likely you are to go. The one thing I will say as well, and it's because I'm increasingly becoming an old duffer, the previous session at times really made my heart hurt. The fact that people feel more comfortable being themselves online than they do in reality, I find really upsetting. And actually the place that real estate has to bring people in, to enable them to be in physical space and feel comfortable and included and invited. Not saying that digital is wrong, but we need to find the balance, don't we? So I think we have an amazing opportunity through Regen and through the places we're creating to bring people in and make it an interesting and enjoyable place for them to be.
And I think, what's happened after the pandemic, we often hear people talking about, over the last 2 or 3 years, what is the future of the office? And often talking about a little bit too early. You're beginning to see very good examples now, albeit it's in some of the larger cities, that those that are coming back in first are the under 30s.
Yeah.
But it's a completely different subject, talking about culture and that within business. But, by creating that environment there, by creating the right quality of accommodation, but then the right amenities and space around it, is what will bring people back in, because we are social animals and we want to interact. I want to come on to talk a little bit about sort of speed of delivery and viability, but before we do, there's one other aspect that we haven't talked about that is really important within this, and this is climate change, and this is approach to sustainability. And I'm going to start with Suzy. Suzy mentioned the Urban Splash of 30 years, and they've issued a video. And they've got a great quote in there that you use that is, the future is... Yeah, there is. Well, there's always. But the future is a shared project, which I thought was great. But if you could give us your views on how important that is. And you talked a little bit about stranded assets, and I think that's a really interesting subject to talk on, because I don't think enough people are thinking about that at the moment.
Yeah, no. So this, in its entirety, I could do a whole conference on my own about this one topic, around how the future may change because of the impacts of climate and ecological crisis. So I'll try not to just go off on a rant, so stop me if I do. But and I think that is the key point, that everything is going to change. Yeah. And I think that human beings, we're enormously arrogant about ourselves as human beings and our place in the planet and how much control we have over all of this. And I think it's very, very difficult for us to even comprehend the change that's going to happen. Even the conversations in the previous panel, a lot of that can just be eradicated if we do not address the climate crisis. There's not going to be a digital world, So it's a huge, huge topic. But I think the key point for us, and one of the things that I do a lot of thinking about in Urban Splash, is how is this going to have an impact on our business model? This is a massive global issue that clearly we, as a company, or us as individuals here in this room, are not going to address on our own. We can't solve all of those problems, but what does it mean for us as a company? And what it boils down to for me is the last 30 years. So I need to try not to go into this. So the last 30 years, has anybody heard of the Great Acceleration? Just raise your hand if you have. Okay, so I'll just talk about the Great Acceleration quickly. So the premise of the Great Acceleration is that there's a series of charts, just to boil it down as quickly as I can, which are like hockey-shaped, curved charts. Since the end of World War II, that's the beginning of the rise of all of these charts. And what they're showing is, the last 30 years is we've all been operating our businesses in the near vertical curve of these hockey stick-shaped curves of the Great Acceleration. So we've been operating in a world where real GDP is going up, vertically, pretty much. Advances in technology, advances in farming efficiency, medical advances, have I said that one? Population growth, everything's been going up. And it's a wonderful time to be running a business. But at the same time, there's been degradation of terrestrial biosphere, climate heating, ocean acidification, and many, many other things. If you Google the Great Acceleration charts, you'll see there's like 40 charts, and they mirror each other. And I think what that shows me is we can't keep going up. That curve has to hit a point where something happens. And so for the next 30 years, we're going to be operating in a completely different context to the last 30. And we're like kind of at this peak of that, like what's going to happen? It's, everyone's trying to help stop it falling off a cliff so that it's not a big dramatic event which, obliterates everything. But it's going to change. Everything has to change. So we're thinking about, well, how do we change our business model? How do we maybe not constantly be striving for bigger and bigger and bigger, more and more and more money, bigger this, bigger that, and more of everything else? Maybe our business model is a little bit different to that. Maybe it's a little bit more boutique. Did you want me to talk specifically about climate stranding risk? Because
I think that's really interesting, because I think it will resonate with a lot of people here, because I think coming out of the pandemic, the tendency is to look short term in terms of what we're doing, but we're also looking at it based on what we know today. So I think if you just comment just briefly on that, and I think I'd like to bring in Sophie then from an investor perspective, and then Nuala and Jennifer just to hear, because I think with the four of you on the panel today, you cover such a wide range of the sector, and actually between the four of you, the key to unlocking this and for people to understand what they need to do now for the future, for their products to be investable.
Yeah, so I said right at the beginning that Urban Splash is a regen and a property company, and so part of what we do is we have a portfolio of commercial assets. It's not huge. We're not a Bruntwood of the world or even an Aviva of the world, but we have a portfolio of commercial assets that we've built up through our regen, and because we're retaining that, we have a vested interest in it. But a lot of those assets are really old, and we fell in love with them and refurbished them and kept hold of them because they're really beautiful. They have architectural and social value, and they in and of themselves came from a stranding risk. So those buildings or assets that we own were stranding for one reason or another, either because of market failure. They were buildings that were built for a particular reason and no one knew what to do with them, or because of social failure, because everything around them had just disappeared and they weren't functioning anymore. And through our regen work, we transformed those assets. Now they're facing a different stranding risk, which is through a climate stranding risk, where they don't perform in, they operationally don't perform well enough to help support the decarbonisation trajectory in the Paris agreements. It's quite a complicated, we talked about it yesterday, so Stuart's nodding, go carry on. So because the UK signed the Paris Accord, the UK is legally obliged to decarbonise at a certain rate, has to do that, and it's made those commitments, and there's lots of ways in which they're going to do that. The property sector has a certain proportion of that allocated to them, and part of the solution for that is making sure our buildings operate in a way which is not going to have a huge carbon impact and is more energy efficient. Old buildings, we all know, are really, really difficult to refurbish, bring them up to environmental and operational performance standards, and you can kind of plot that on the decarbonisation graph and determine when your building is going to strand. And there's a tool to do that called the CREM tool. I don't know if anybody knows about it. It's pretty brilliant and also quite scary when you put your portfolio into that and realise where it's going to strand. And at the point in which it strands, you essentially need to refurbish it to bring the operational performance up to standard, and you may need to do that multiple times. And I think what that means for anybody who's in property, whether that's existing assets or new builds, is understanding where your new build property is on that stranding curve, because what you don't want to do is bring a building into existence that is going to strand in the next 10 years. But if you have existing assets, where are you on that trajectory, and what does that mean for the refurbishment strategy of that building between now and 2050?
And I think that's a really neat point to bring you in, Sophie, because I feel like attitudes are changing amongst investors, but at the same time I also feel that hasn't necessarily translated into deals yet, which is a thing ultimately is going to change values, which will change habits and the way that we approach this from buildings, when, you know, that might meet sort of struggling viability criteria.
Yeah, it's a really hot topic. I think Aviva was one of the early ones that came out and made a commitment to net zero by 2040, and so because of the role that ACP and the wider real estate investment businesses are making in that, actually the things that we're doing now, like you say, are absolutely going to be really core to that. And so we're doing a lot of thinking about, you know, where do we put our investments, how do we try and do the right thing, how do we make the right decisions about the right product that's going to sort of work forwards and support that wider piece. And it, you know, as an insurance business, climate change is a real risk. And Amanda particularly has been sort of very vocal. She's very much part of the government task force and various others. I guess the bit that personally I still feel we haven't quite cracked is, it feels at the moment that every way you turn, you come up with a solution and a problem. So it's like, is it, you know, you don't knock it down. Okay, well, if you keep it, how do you make it right? How, you know, if you think about transport and EV, for example, well, that's good, but it's not good. And there's so much confusion around it. Like, how do we actually make decisions about what's the right route to take and know that we're making informed and viable decisions that we will be looking forward in 20, 30, 40 and saying, no, we got it right. And I think we still need to keep driving and pushing ourselves forwards, perhaps through those innovation points that you talked about earlier, about, you know, what are the other answers for the future? Because I don't think I've got them at the moment.
No, and I think as Suzy said, you know, it's probably an all-day topic in itself. But Nuala, from a city council perspective, obviously lots of different city councils have got well-published sort of climate change targets. Where do you sit on that as a city? And obviously we're seeing some changes from government now in terms of moving out some of those criteria. So notwithstanding what Suzy said about the importance of doing it, how are you approaching that as a city?
I suppose there's two things. There's the city ourselves as an our estate and what we're doing, what we can do as our own. And then there's also, say, from a planning perspective, a statutory body. I would say, and this is a challenge I think all councils will find, we have 18,000 assets within our own portfolio of varying ranges and some out on lease arrangements as well. But, you know, we're doing a bit of a stock take on that about how we actually get our own assets into, I would say, where they need to be. We also, I think, with pros and cons on this, have more listed buildings than any other city outside of London. So to your point, you know, but then we've got things like the Municipal Hotel and the Martins Bank building with Kinrise, bringing those back into use and doing a really good job on refurbishment. But I think on a broader city scale, there's a real challenge. We have 2030 targets in terms of net zero, and the combined authority for Liverpool is 2040 targets. So there's a real challenge, both in terms of our own estate from the capital investment side that's required. And then when you talk about city partners, what are they doing and how do you convene that? What's the role of the council in this? We know from an investment perspective coming in, people want to see that. So, for example, the Spine building that we brought forward, you know, is you know, excellent BREEAM and actually a wellness perspective to it. But the legislation as well, in terms of where we need to get to on this, is probably not there. So in some respects, it depends on who's coming in, who's the partner that you've got, and parts of it are a nice to have as opposed to a requirement to have. And there's funding challenges and all of that, and I get it, but I think things are not going fast enough because from a council perspective, you know, you have very little powers. It's land, money, and planning powers in terms of what you want to do, and then you rely on others to bring it forward. But I also think, you know, we don't have a huge amount of housing stock, and the council divested of its housing stock years ago. So you have a lot of RPs and others within that. And I think when you talk about low-income areas outside the city and the amount of investment that's required within all of our cities to get us to where we need to go is actually, it's quite frightening. So I think there really needs to be, I would say, a proper focus on this. I mean, we're conscious from Liverpool too. It's a waterfront city. You know, where are we within that whole scheme of things? But I think there's a willingness there from people, but it needs to be translated into the doing.
It feels, you say, it's a huge task to get it right. We've got the opportunity. I think we recognise what needs to be done. And Jennifer, I know you're sort of one aspect of UK government, but it almost feels to me like, you know, that you know, we're going to have to encourage that change. And obviously we've seen things like levelling up come through, but you know, does there need to be some form of additional green subsidies or whatever? I know that it's all part of this mix together. And I know it's more difficult, you can't talk about policy per se, so maybe just give me or give everybody a quick sort of, just a view, wherever you want to take it.
So yeah, this is a tricky one for me to tiptoe through in some ways. I mean, I think a little bit like Nuala, we've got responsibilities across our organisation because we're also, I tend to think about the investment side of life, but we're also a very big landowner, and we're responsible for parcelling up land and selling on for house building. So how we think about our custodianship of our own land while we own it, how we think about how we sell land and the partners that we work with in order to develop out, and then how we think about the partners that we work with when we're providing finance for development are all really, really important. One really, really big change for us recently has been previously when we were selling land, we were always obliged to sell at best value. We've had a major breakthrough in terms of saying we can now sell at what's known as, and I didn't really know what this means, less than best. But what it means is that we can put some more qualitative factors into that decision process when we're disposing of land, so we can start taking into account the things that might encourage and drive better and more sustainable build quality and treatment and life. So it's really important to us on that land side. And I think on the investment piece, again, we have a sort of narrow line to tread between not wanting to put onerous burdens. I mean, we're very much here to support SMEs to deliver, and there's a little bit about what we can do without weighing them down with a ton of requirements that means that they're just swamped by it and smothered by it. How can we work with them so that each development that they do is progressively notching things up a little bit? And one of the lending partnerships that we've put together with Octopus Investments is one that actually rewards borrowers with an improvement on their margin if they're improving the quality of the energy efficiency of their houses. I know that's only one measure, but that's the kind of way we can start nudging in the right direction.
Right. We've probably got time for just a couple of quick questions, because I do want to come back to the panel for a couple of final thoughts. But if anybody has got a question, raise your hand now, please. No questions. I can't even believe Mr. Cons hasn't got a question. Yeah, I knew he would. I knew he wouldn't let me down.
This is probably a question for Jennifer. We get involved in a lot of sort of regen around maybe stranded retail assets. I think every single appraisal has a column in it that says Homes England. Do Homes England see their role? I mean, you talk about fractured ownership in town centres. Well, a lot of the shopping centres we're looking at that aren't really functioning as shopping centres are under single ownership in the middle of a town. That's the great place to put people, that's the great place for people to live. It starts that vibrancy back in, it regenerates, the retail, the high street comes back, the social value off the back of that is enormous. Do Homes England see their role in that space, helping my clients transform the assets that sit in the middle of our town centres?
A qualified yes. So I said at the outset, sorry, that my background goes back to retail asset management, specifically shopping centres. And Stuart knows I've had more conversations in the last 18 months with people I haven't spoken to in about 20 years for exactly that reason. Now, I'll be completely honest with you. The reason it's a qualified yes is it's a space that we really want to be in. We totally see the need. And we, particularly on the debt side, but also a little bit on my side, have been working through what the package we can offer is. One of the challenges with government is that sometimes our aspiration, or government agencies, sometimes our aspiration runs a little bit ahead of what the tools we actually have can do. So we have to be a little bit, we're in a position just now where we have to be a little bit creative when we have those conversations. We absolutely want to have them.
Fantastic.
Thanks, James. Anybody else?
Just from a Homes England perspective.
Sorry, would you mind saying who you are and where you're from? It's a useful context for the...
Yeah, John Lowe, Knowsley Council.
Thank you.
Conscious that a lot of the discussion's been around city centres rather than peripheral towns. In terms of funding for unlocking town centre sites, viability, are Homes England going to redirect funds to viability of town centres? It seems to be largely stacked for vacant brownfield sites rather than town centre or city centre.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Is that how's Homes England going to direct capital to unlock stranded sites in your kind of location?
In town centres or city centres rather than more mainstream residential units?
I think it comes back to everything we've been talking about earlier in terms of it. It comes down to the local place, how ready it is for that level of investment, how prepared it is to dedicate its own time, not just money resources, but its time, its people, and how ready it is for that investment that we can then work with that place to bring things forward. I don't think little is off the radar for us, but it has to be aligned with the funding capabilities that we have, and it has to be, whether it's public or private sector partners, ones that are ready to work with us.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. So finally, I'd like to come to each of our panellists and just ask them to finish on a positive before we go out and have some drinks on the terrace. What are you most excited about and positive about looking ahead over the next couple of years? Sophie.
Oh, glad you put me first. So I think what I'm most positive and excited about, there's a couple of things actually. In a funny way, a lot of the heat's been taken out of the market, and as long as landowners respond to that, I think it gives us a bit of an opportunity to rebase, and I think that can deal with some of the viability issues that perhaps were facing us. So I think that's, in a strange way, could be a bit of a positive when things settle again. But also I think the noise around doing the right thing, around placemaking, around being more balanced in our developments, about being more socially minded in what we're trying to bring forwards just feels like it grows and grows. And so actually I think that's a real positive that, you know, there is so many developers particularly that we talk to out there that are trying to do all the P's, so really purposeful development. But actually as that starts being more successful, and investors definitely are thinking about ESG, I think the dial is starting to change. People are starting to think really more about what's my money doing, what's my development doing, what does my place feel like.
Great, thank you. Nuala?
Well, because I'm quite new in the role still, so 5 months in, and I love Liverpool, like as a city. When you talked about, both you said about the bones of a city earlier, I just think it's an incredible city that actually hasn't realised its potential and the opportunity that's there yet. So we've just got approval to go into a waterfront master plan strategy, which wasn't there before. So some work around that. We have sites coming to market, King's Dock, which is near Albert Dock, and other things that we're bringing forward, and an overall vision and piece for the city. How do we get there? Again, working with partners, with Homes England, but a range of stakeholders that are existing in the city. So despite the challenges that we've talked about, it's really working with others and really seeing where Liverpool can go. I'm very optimistic about it.
Right, Suzy?
So I think I might take a short and a long-term horizon answer, if that's okay. At the moment, I'm very excited about historically, I think that the rhetoric was always that the consumer, or the end user would always drive a change towards social and environmental progressiveness and positive impacts. We shorten that to ESG, don't we? But I don't know if everybody's familiar with that acronym. But what I'm seeing at the moment is, yes, that's important to our customers. You know, we know that it's important to 100% of our customers for different reasons. But the real drive for change is coming through the financial markets, which I think is a surprise for everybody. But that, I feel, is where all of the drive for change is coming from, because financial markets, big institutional investors, are recognising the value in positive environmental and social impact. And so in the short term, I'm really excited about that. One, because I know that we're really ready for it. You know, we've been doing it for 30 years, so I know we're ready, so I know it's great for our business. But then off the back of that, I'm really excited about the next generation flooding our workforce. I'm actually very confused about what they're called, whether it's Gen Alpha or Gen C, I'm not quite sure, but that generation who also really value those things, because I think then that's when we're going to see significant changes in business models and how we are actually operating commercially.
We could just call them the future generation, couldn't we?
Just call them, yeah, or just the future.
Yeah. Jennifer.
Nice plug there, Stuart. So, privilege of coming last is you get to agree with everyone who's gone ahead of you, but I think I would absolutely echo Suzy's point, because that shift in the way that asset owners think about things has been phenomenal over my career. When I started work, office teams did not speak to retail teams, certainly didn't speak to shed teams, and they never spoke to the resi guys because they were just a bit dodge. So the fact that you now have asset owners who are thinking much, much more holistically about their assets and moving away from that incredibly siloed view of their assets is really, really important. And an awful lot is being driven by the desire to create the right places and to be responsible with their investors' capital and how it's deployed. And I think I'd also echo Sophie's point as well about the reset we've had in pricing, or the resets coming in pricing, because we've been living in a very artificial period for the last 13 years, and you've got an entire generation that's grown up in work thinking that 0% interest rates is normal. We all know it just isn't. So I know we're going through some short-term pain, but I'm actually really excited about the opportunity that reset offers, and that shift in mindset and capital that's coming with it, and I think that's going to be incredibly powerful.
That's great, thank you. And just finally, sort of thank you to my expert panel today. I think probably what I'm most excited about is to hear that actually you're all pretty much aligned in terms of the way forward to deliver, true transformation. Because, unless we deliver true transformation, we won't deliver what our future generations need, and how do we do that responsibly and sustainably? So thank you again very much, and thank you, Ibrahim, for heading up our panel sessions today, and thank you, Stephen, for hosting the second session. I know one or two people have got to dash off, but a few of us will still be around, so come and say hello and ask us any further questions. But thank you very much all for attending today.